The idea of a sustainable future seems too caged for those before us. The time is now for today's generation to tackle the inevitable climate crisis head on. Welcome back to another exciting episode of A Tryst with Statecraft. I'm your host, Teresa Kuruvila, Managing Editor at Project Statecraft, a youth-run, non-partisan policy think tank. Joining me today is Abhiir Bhalla, a force to reckon with. He is an active youth environmentalist making waves on a global scale. For over 8 years, Abhiir has dedicated himself to the field of environmental conservation, earning recognition as one of the most foremost youth environmentalists by BBC News in 2020. His impressive work has been highlighted both nationally and internationally, reflecting his deep commitment to creating a sustainable future. He is the driving force behind the highly successful climate change podcast, Candid Climate Conversations, where he engages with experts and activists to explore solutions to our most pressing environmental challenges. With this magnanimous introduction, Abhiir, it is an honor to have you today at this episode. You've done so much in such little time. So we'll be moving on to the very first question that we have. The subject of climate change and sustainability continues to attract, dare I say, very little attention in India. So if I were to come across a headline of rising pollution rates in Delhi, it has little to no attention or so for a momentary lapse of time. One major indicator is that climate change is still not enjoying much electoral importance in the upcoming 2024 Lok Sabha elections. What can be done to increase the urgency with respect to climate change in the minds of voters? And does the youth have a role to play in this?
Very interesting question, Teresa. Thanks for that. Let me give you some context, right? Since you mentioned the election, I think I want to start by giving some context. Um, India today is the world's largest democracy, as we know. And it wasn't until as late as 2019, which was just the last general election, that the two largest parties in the country, the Indian National Congress and the Bharatiya Janata Party, um, found mention, that the words climate change did not find mention in their electoral manifestos right up until 2019. We've known about climate change for almost half a century now, if not longer, and yet climate change only found mention in their electoral manifestos as late as the last election. Now, while all of this is well and good, and it's indeed heartening to see that the two parties have moved from not mentioning climate change in their manifestos for so many years to actually mentioning it in 2019 and now to having such substantive commitments in 2024. The unfortunate problem remains that neither of the two parties are actually talking about these things on the campaign trail. So it's well and good to have something on your manifesto, but on the campaign trail, nobody is talking about clean air, water security, energy transitions. None of that is there, right? So that is one big reason as to why climate change is not being spoken of electorally, because it's not yet a voting issue, right? Now, you asked me, how do we solve this, right? Let me go on a bit of a tangent and let me give you an example, right? Now, for the last 5, 6, 7 years, maybe even longer, we've seen that the Supreme Court, the National Green Tribunal, the Delhi government, all the competent authorities have banned firecrackers, right? Year after year for the last 7, 8 years. This typically happens in the winter months, and this ban unfortunately has fallen on deaf ears, right? Now, in 2020, I remember it was the first year of COVID, and I woke up the morning after Diwali and I saw that the headline was 1,200 complaints of firecrackers filed with the Delhi police, right? Now, to me, obviously, what immediately came to mind was the 1,200 complaints is nothing. The real number is much higher. Now, that being said, what's the point I'm making here, right? The point that I'm making here is that if those 1,200 complaints were to fall to, say, 300 complaints, that would send a message. You know what message that would send? it would communicate to our politicians that we care about the firecracker ban. Today, we're in a catch-22. We're in a vicious cycle where society believes that, climate change is too large of an issue for them to address. And on the other hand, institutions, namely your corporates and your governments, all of them think that they've done their bit, but society doesn't care enough to follow laws and rules which have been introduced, right? So we're stuck in this catch-22 where we're waiting for each other to be the first actor and to show that one of the two actors cares. Now, how do we get out of this vicious cycle, right? When society is waiting for institutions and institutions are waiting for society to come out of this rut, we need to demonstrate, we as society need to demonstrate that we care, right? Let's go back to that example. If those 1,200 complaints fell to 300 complaints, the message that goes to your rational politician is that that's a potential 900 votes for them. That means that if he, she, or they talk about air pollution in their next electoral rally, or if they talk about a firecracker ban in their next electoral rally, that sends a message. Because to him or to her or to them, that would mean that 900 more people might be willing to vote for that particular politician just because they're talking about enforcing a firecracker ban, right? And this is not a hand-picked example. This is applicable even to the pollution check certificates in your cars. It's applicable to the odd even rule. It's applicable to your 10 and 15-year ban on diesel and petrol vehicles. So it's universal. But to exit this catch-22 where we're waiting for each other, we have to have society make the first step and show that we care, because only when we show we care will our politicians talk about it.
What a fantastic insight and a great start to the episode. So it's truly about engaging the current political forces and even fostering a culture for the next generation of politicians that climate change, regardless of which party is ruling, is an inevitable factor that we have to consider, regardless of political manifestos. It is so inherent and it is clearly overlooked, particularly with regard to this year's elections. So, my next question to you is, as these conversations about climate debt and the varied levels of responsibility in both developed and developing nations are given about with respect to climate change mitigation in an international forum, do you think it is expedient for developing countries like India to give a higher priority to development than environmental conversation at this stage? Or is there a way we can strike a balance between two so that we don't neglect neither?
See, I'll start by answering the second part of your question. Uh, this is a very often asked question, of course, in terms of is there a trade-off between sustainability and development, and where do we draw the line, right? Uh, Today, where we're having, as recently as last week, we're having scientific journals telling us that, forget 1.5 degrees, we're on track to hit 2.5 degrees or even cross that. I think today the world is at a stage, developing, no matter what we are, the world is at a stage where we cannot prioritize development over sustainability, right? Um, and that's where, in some senses, as basic as it may sound, but that's the very reason sustainable development is named as such. So the short answer to your second question is there a trade-off? Do we draw the line? No, there's not a trade-off. I think, um, of course, the line has to be drawn, but we have to ensure that the line is progressively shifting for the better, right? Now, in terms of your comment on climate debt and developed and developing countries, see, I've had the privilege to, be a part of the last 2 or 3 COPs in person. And let's consider the example of, the infamous $100 billion commitment which was made from developed countries to developing countries. Now, that commitment was promised to these developing countries by 2019. However, it wasn't right up until COP28, just 6 months ago in Dubai, where we saw that, this 100 billion commitment was actually operationalized, which is to say that we were already running late um, on a commitment of 2019 in a world where $100 billion is no longer even a relevant figure. 100 billion was benchmarked for 2019.
So, coming back to my next question, I've noticed, Abhiir, after some research, air pollution has been your key area of focus. So, based on that, what strategies have you found the most effective in promoting behavior change towards tackling the air pollution? And can you tell us about any surprising insights or challenges in influencing public attitudes and behaviors, especially amongst youth?
Mm-hmm. Well, air pollution is is a very big area, and rightly so, as you said, something that I'm very passionate about and have worked on for the last 11 or more years. Um, See, behavioral change comes from the ground up, right? Not from a top-down approach. Let me give you an example. Again, I think that's the best way to communicate, the gravity of the situation. About maybe say 3 years ago, sometime during COVID, I was working with a nonprofit called Care for Air, right? I was leading community engagement for them, and I had a team of about 40 volunteers where we were developing air pollution based education modules. We were taking them to schools and colleges, but also conducting workshops with corporates, retirement homes, all of that, right? Now, one fine day, we were addressing virtually a retirement home in Bangalore, which happened to have the majority of its residents were former ISRO scientists. Um, and I asked them, what do you think is, you know, uh, do you think air purifiers are doing harm for us? Are they doing, are they helping us? Are they helping clean the air? Do you think they're useful? Or for that matter, do you even think that, air pollution is an issue that we need to seriously work on? And this fine gentleman, very, very smart guy, uh, very cute, old, wise guy, told me, he stood up and he said, oh, we're Indians, and with our immunity, we don't need to worry. And mind you, this is a retired ISRO scientist, okay? He must be 75, 80 years old, perfectly of sound mind, very sharp guy. He stands up and he says, oh, we're Indians. With our immunity, uh, we don't need to worry about air pollution. We simply we keep breathing this air, and our lungs develop an immunity to it. When we were kids, we used to eat sand. When back in the village, we used to eat muck and dirt off the floor, and just like we used to do that, and that helped us build a strong stomach. The same way, our lungs will adapt to air pollution, and air pollution doesn't pose a threat to us. Now, I was shocked to hear this because obviously this is this happened to be one of the erstwhile finest scientific minds of our country who was sending rockets up into space, but yet this misconception around air pollution persisted. And again, this was an ISRO's retired scientist, right? Imagine if he is thinking like this, what um you know the economically weaker sections of society who have lower access to education and healthcare are thinking about, right? Um, Now, the point that I'm making to you through this is that, needless to say, it's a myth to believe that we as Indians are resilient to air pollution. Air pollution has a myriad of health complications for us, but people don't understand that. And that's fair. You know what? Because we live in a country where 50 to 60% of the population, if not more, is still struggling to meet is still struggling to make basic ends meet. We know that, income inequality is at an all-time high and is growing higher and higher by the day. Um, so, I don't blame someone if their priority is to put roti on the table or a shelter over their heads rather than to worry about air pollution, right? That being said, the larger issue is that even for the 30, 40, or 50%, which does have some amount of knowledge around air pollution, does have some amount of understanding of its risks, still does not care, right? And in such a situation, then that's where we're being irresponsible citizens. That's where we're being, that's where again it needs to become a voting issue. Um, to address your question more concretely, right? How do you bring about behavioral change? Again, I just explained to you the scale of the issue that we are facing, but behavioral change, in my opinion, comes through, again, a very simple funda, right? Uh, as human beings, all, if not most of us, are inherently selfish, right? Now, everyone, myself included, by the way, till class six, I used to think, at worst, I was like Donald Trump, where I thought climate change was a hoax. And at best, I used to think that it's not my issue to care about or act on, right? Most of us today still occupy a similar mindset. We think that air pollution or climate change is too vast of an issue for us to act on. And therefore, because it's something that's so massive, it's something only the government can care and should act on. And therefore, there's no responsibility with us. And that's the problem I'm trying to solve through my work. And how do you do that? It's simple. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of BCE and which is behavioral change. Sorry, BCC, which is behavioral change communication. Um, we do workshops with people, and rather than telling them, you know, oh, we have 5 factors which cause air pollution, we have 5 consequences, these are the government laws. That's boring. Anyone can do that. Anyone can look that up on the internet. What we do is we brainstorm and we talk, and I do this with many nonprofits, even today. We we conduct sessions. I conduct sessions where we brainstorm and we drive these people to realize why they need to care about climate change, right? For me, I got into climate change and air pollution because I realized that Delhi's air was giving me seasonal allergies and it was adversely affecting not just my health, but that of everyone else around me. So that's when I was like, shit, yaar, I need to do something about this. I need to work on this issue. Similarly, that's my objective. That's what I'm working on, right? I want to make everyone realize, oh shit, climate change is affecting me in this way, and that's why I need to do my bit. That's why I need to care. So today, the secret towards behavioral change communication is not about doing a standardized workshop which everyone can do, or just Google, put on a PPT, say, oh, these are the causes and consequences of air pollution, but rather to make everyone individually realize how air pollution or how climate change is affecting their life. In Bangalore, we saw massive, water scarcity, which is still going on even now in some parts. Uh, that's what else is that if not climate change? What if else is that if not a mismanagement of resources, right? So making people realize that these day-to-day phenomena, whether it's a flood, a drought, a landslide, a forest fire, or even something closer to home, even something like their plants drying up in the balcony, or say a fruit tree in their backyard which is not growing or not giving fruits, all of that is linked to climate change, right? Students staying back. I remember when I was studying at Ashoka, I had 1 week off because of smog break, right? All of those are factors which make people care. You tell an athlete that, oh, you can't go out and play today because the AQI is 600. Obviously, the athlete will care if that's happening day after day. So, changing mindsets, winning hearts and minds is all about making people understand why they need to care, what's in it for them, right? And that's the change that we've tried.
It's really disheartening to also know that we're living in one of the most polluted cities in this planet, and little to no importance is given, whether it's through the form of politics, whether it's the form of scientific technologies or innovations in architecture, how minimal the attention is given to air pollution. So it's a really daunting, but hopefully an empowering alarm for all those engaged in climate action. Now, coming to the next question, addressing the environmental justice is a very important aspect of sustainability. So, given your experience, how can these sustainability initiatives specifically target and address the environmental concerns of marginalized or vulnerable communities in our nation, and ensuring that they benefit equitably from environmental improvements and that they're not disproportionately burdened by the degradation that follows?
See, the simple solution to that, if I tell you in one sentence, is that it's all economics and politics, right? Which is to say that today, any walk of life of ours, or any career for that matter, is affected by climate change, right? Um, and typically when people talk about social justice or environmental justice, if you close your eyes, the image that comes to mind for most people is, oh, there's some village where there's a drought, or there's some village where there's a flood. They don't have equitable access to resources, whether it's hospitals, whether it's drinking water, all of those things. And that's true to some extent, but we also don't realize that even climate justice is all pervasive, right? I mean, I can go half an hour away from my house and I can find a slum which still doesn't have access to, clean cooking fuel. They're using kerosene, or they're using a chula which yields immense amounts of indoor air pollution, right? That is also an issue of environmental and social justice, which people don't talk about. Similarly, access to water, similarly, even access to something like sunlight, right? That not only directly affects your health, but also plays a role in generating solar energy, which, as we're seeing, is becoming more and more common, right? The point that I'm making here is climate justice is an issue which honestly is often neglected. Again, going back to my last answer, simply because there isn't enough awareness, right? Right now, the bigger challenge in front of us is making people aware that whatever is happening because of climate change. The next step is to explain that, okay, these are consequences of climate change, but it's disproportionately affecting different sections of society, right? A flood in Delhi or air pollution in Delhi will not make much of a difference to someone who can just buy an air purifier. But the same air quality, even in Delhi, in a slum, or even in a village outside Delhi, will just be something they have to put up with because they can't afford an air purifier, right? But again, for people who don't acknowledge that air pollution is a consequence or a contributor to climate change, how do you then go about convincing them that, people are being disproportionately affected by it? So, in some senses, as unfortunate as it is, that is a second step, or at least maybe it's too far to say it's a second step, but at the very least, it is an issue which needs to be propagated or worked on hand in hand, along with building climate change awareness. In fact, it's a great tool, right? You make people aware about their voting rights. You tell them that, oh, ABC village is facing XYZ climate issue, whereas another village is not, right? And that then becomes an issue of economic and political managerial abilities. It then therefore becomes a voting issue. So yeah, that's the sort of uh life cycle I see when it comes to building awareness around this.
Well, that's definitely an insight, considering that we're living in two different paradigms of the reality of
Mm-hmm.
climate crisis. Yeah, so we have
Yeah.
one party that has access to all the resources to combat the climate change, and another party that's facing the consequences and at the same time witnessing the downfall of the degradation that our environment is going through at the moment. So my last question is, As a sustainable consultant and policy advocate, you've done so much within such a short span of time. What actionable advice would you offer to young activists and aspiring environmentalists who are eager to bring in more meaningful contributions to the table with regard to environmental protection and sustainability?
It's a very generic answer that I'm going to give you, but it holds true nonetheless, right? I think when it comes to climate, it's all about being passionate and it's all about being informed. Why is it important to be informed? A, because only when you're well informed will you understand how climate change is affecting you. When you understand how climate change is affecting you, then you will start to care. When you start to care, you will start to talk to people about it and you will start to do something about it, right? So that's why you need to be informed. Now, why do you need to be passionate? Because today we live in a world where, I can tell you, I know enough of my juniors from school and college, or even my batchmates. I know enough people today who are doing social and environmental issues just to pad up their CVs and then get into a good college or get a good job and then they forget about it, right? And as someone who has worked on the ground with communities, I can tell you this does more harm than good. I've had my own batchmates in school in class 10, 11, and 12 who started social initiatives. They were doing phenomenal work on climate justice in Gurgaon, in Sonipat, and they did it for 2 years. They graduated, they got into stellar colleges, and suddenly they disappeared, not so much as a goodbye to the communities they were working with, right? And of course, this is a whole other debate. Uh, but I always tell my juniors, at the very least, pass the baton down, right? Because even your juniors need to get into college, even they need to get jobs, even they need to pad up your CVs. So if you're doing something that's socially, environmentally meaningful, pass the baton down. If you start a project, if you're working with the community, or even if you're doing something simple like making and selling paper bags or cloth bags, um, you know, pass that initiative down. Ensure someone carries forward the good work. Because not only is it helping the communities you're working with, but it's also helping your juniors and also you to build a legacy and build an initiative that has sustained outcomes. Now, I know this is a bit of a tangent, but the reason I'm mentioning this is because, go back to the causal chain I drew up earlier about why information is important to make people care and act and talk about issues of climate. That's the case because until someone realizes that they need to passionately work on this issue, they're not going to make a difference, right? I would rather have 20 people doing 40% for the climate rather than have 2,000 people doing 1% for the climate, right? Because then there's a lot of duplication, there's a lot of photo ops, there's a lot of greenwashing, but it's not translating into authentic outcomes. And therefore, my simple advice is be passionate and be informed, and the rest will follow. It can be something. I remember when I was doing my initiative with the Delhi Metro, it can be something as we were doing nukkad nataks and flash mobs at these metro stations. And I would get questions as simple as, how do I buy a bamboo toothbrush, or why should I buy a bamboo toothbrush? To, oh, how can I get a subsidy on my EV, or how can I make power back from the grid if I install a solar panel, right? Um, all of those are questions that we must educate ourselves about, and sort of figure out how we can do our own bit in our lives, whether that's taking a bucket bath, whether that's using an EV, whether it's switching to a bamboo toothbrush, whether it means carrying a bag when you're buying groceries, right? Uh, you hear all of these suggestions very often, right? But what you don't hear is that you need the correct information and the right amount of passion to actually make it work and to sustain it. So, yeah, that's my advice.
Wow, that's really incredible to know, considering that you've worked so proactively well and you've engaged with those people who are benefiting and those who are not doing that great with regard to the current of changes that are taking place because of climate crisis. One last question I've just noticed, and this is something that was picked up while doing my bit of research on you, Abhiir. You said you have aspirations of becoming the Prime Minister of India someday, and today we're talking about manifestos of political parties that completely disregard the ongoing climate crisis altogether. So, if you were given the opportunity, and I know you're quite passionate about it, what changes would you bring to your own manifesto if you are a contender for the Prime Minister's seat in a few years? And what
Well,
do
I'm
you
going to give you a very unsatisfying answer to that question, but also a very realistic answer, which is that as of now, I've decided to push forth my political ambitions by about 5 to 10 years. I've decided to enter politics after becoming a subject matter expert and then enter politics as a technocrat along the lines of Ashwini Vaishnav, our Minister Shankar, who excelled in their respective fields as civil servants and then entered politics, right? But to answer the other part of your question around what I would put on a manifesto, I said unsatisfying answer because I don't know where the world will be 5 years or 10, forget 5 or 10 years. I don't know where the world will be 3 years from now, you know. So obviously my manifesto would be grounded in the necessities and realities of the time. What I can tell you is that I've definitely seen a significant growth in the commitments made in the manifestos of the two largest parties from 2019 to 2024. So that's a step in the right direction. But again, is it translating to popular discourse? Is it translating to conversations on the ground? No, you know. So if you ask me 3 years from now, I wouldn't mind copying the BJP or the Congress's climate manifestos. They aren't all that bad. But what I would change is to actually talk about it on the ground, create a buzz, and make people aware that climate is a voting issue because it affects our lives in all possible ways.
really exciting to see what's next for you, Abhiir. And with that, we come to an end of yet another insightful episode of A Tryst with Statecraft. Thanks again, Abhiir, for joining us and giving us your thoughts and concoctions on the current and ongoing climate crisis. It's really aspiring to know that voices like yourself are working to first analyze and unravel the problems on a grassroots level and understand the niches that are affected and niches that are benefiting. So thank you for that. On that note, I'd like to thank you again for your time. And on behalf of everyone here at Project Statecraft, I thank you again for joining us in today's episode. I'm your host, Teresa Kuruvila, signing off.